You will be expelled from this school. Don't you understand me?
Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the marble lobby of the National Education Summit, staring at a name tag that felt like a cosmic joke. Dr. Marcus Webb, keynote speaker founder, the Webb Learning Method. The same building, literally the same building, where 15 years ago he'd sat in a disciplinary hearing while a panel of administrators decided his fate. The same conference room where they told his mother, Marcus is unteachable. He doesn't belong in traditional education. The same institution that had expelled him at 14 years old and closed the door on his future. And now they'd invited him back, not as the problem student they'd given up on, but as a solution they were desperate to implement. Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, appeared at his elbow. They are ready for you in the main hall. There are 2,000 educators waiting to hear about the Webb method. Marcus took a breath. Is she here? Who? Dr. Patricia Morrison, the principal who expelled me. Jennifer checked her tablet. Yes. Front row, center, along with the entire administrative team from Lincoln Academy. Of course she was. Marcus looked down at his keynote notes. 15 years of research condensed into 4 to 5 minutes. A teaching methodology that was now used in 3,000 schools across 37 countries. An approach that had been peer-reviewed, validated, and celebrated by the same education establishment that had once declared it creator unteachable. The irony was exquisite. The vindication was overwhelming. But underneath it all was something else. A 14-year-old boy who still remembered what it felt like to be told he was broken beyond repair. Let's do this, Marcus said. But before we see how this story ends, we need to go back to where it began. To a classroom where a boy who learned differently was labeled as someone who couldn't learn at all. To the moment everything fell apart. And to the unexpected discovery that would change education forever. 15 years earlier. Marcus Webb, this is your third disruption this week. Mrs. Patterson stood at the front of her 7th grade math class, her face red with frustration, her finger pointed at Marcus like an accusation. I wasn't disrupting, Marcus said quietly. I was just. You were tapping your pencil, loudly, repeatedly, while I was explaining fractions. I was listening. I can listen and tap at the same time. Obviously you can't, because you failed yesterday's quiz. Marcus felt 30 pairs of eyes on him. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. I didn't fail. I got a C. A C- is failing in my class. Mrs. Patterson walked toward his desk. And do you know why you got a C-? Because you can't sit still. You can't focus. You can't follow simple instructions. I understand fractions, Marcus said. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. I just showed my work differently than you wanted. There's a correct way to show work, Marcus. The way I taught you. The way everyone else in this class understands. But you insist on doing things your own way, which is wrong. It's not wrong, it's just different. Different is wrong when you're in my classroom. Mrs. Patterson's voice rose. You don't get to make up your own rules. You don't get to decide how to learn. That's my job. And frankly, you're making it impossible. Marcus stared at his desk. Don't cry. Don't give them that. Go to the principal's office, Mrs. Patterson said. I'm done dealing with you today. But I didn't. Now, Marcus. He gathered his things slowly, his hands shaking. As he walked toward the door, he heard whispers. Finally! He's so annoying. Why doesn't he just act normal? Marcus walked to Principal Morrison's office for the 4th time that month. He was 14 years old, and he was drowning. Principal Patricia Morrison was in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many problem students to be surprised by one more. Marcus, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. We need to talk. I was listening to the lesson. I can tap my pencil and listen at the same time. My brain works better when my hands are moving. Your brain, Principal Morrison interrupted, doesn't work the way it needs to for traditional education. The words hung in the air. I've been reviewing your file, she continued, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. 6 teachers have flagged you this semester alone. You disrupt classes. You don't follow instructions. You argue with teachers about their methods. You refuse to do homework the way it's assigned. Because the way it's assigned doesn't make sense for how I learn. Marcus, the way you learn isn't how teaching works. Teaching works when students follow the system. You won't follow the system. The system doesn't work for me. Then maybe, Principal Morrison said slowly, carefully, traditional school isn't the right fit for you. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. What does that mean? It means we've tried. We've given you accommodations. We've had meetings with your mother. We've offered tutoring. Nothing works because you won't engage with the process. I am engaging. I'm just engaging differently. Different isn't an option here, Marcus. We have 800 students. We can't customize education for every child who doesn't want to follow the rules. I'm not asking you to customize for everyone. Just let me show my work my way. Let me move while I think. Let me. You're asking for special treatment. That's not fair to the other students who manage just fine with our methods. Marcus's voice cracked. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to learn. Principal Morrison's expression softened slightly. I know you are. But Marcus, some students just aren't suited for academic environments. It's not your fault. Some people are hands-on learners. Trade skills. Vocational training. There are other paths. I don't want other paths. I want to learn. I love learning. I just don't learn the way you teach. Then I'm afraid traditional education isn't going to work for you. The final incident happened 3 weeks later. Marcus was in science class, supposedly paying attention to a lecture about the solar system. But Mr. Chen's monotone voice explaining facts Marcus had already memorized from books he'd read on his own was making his brain feel like static. So Marcus started drawing. Not doodling. Drawing. A detailed diagram of the solar system with accurate orbital paths, relative sizes, and moons labeled. He was adding details about gravitational pull when Mr. Chen's voice cut through his focus. Mr. Webb, are you taking notes on my lecture? Marcus looked up. No, I'm drawing the solar system. See, if you show the orbital mechanics this way. I didn't ask you to draw. I asked you to listen. I am listening. I can draw and listen. Actually, I understand it better when I visualize. You're being disruptive and disrespectful. Mr. Chen walked over and took Marcus's notebook, looked at the drawing. His expression didn't change. This is art class, not science. If you're not going to take proper notes, you can sit in the hallway. But this IS notes. This is how I remember information. Hallway. Now. Marcus sat in the hallway for the remaining 30 minutes of class. When the bell rang, Mr. Chen appeared with a discipline referral. This is your 7th referral this semester, he said, handing Marcus the form. I'm recommending expulsion. The expulsion hearing was held on a Thursday morning in April. Marcus sat between his mother and a school advocate while a panel of 5 administrators reviewed his case. His mother, Elena Webb, worked 2 jobs, morning shift at a hospital, evening shift at a grocery store. She'd taken off work for this, which meant losing wages they couldn't afford to lose. We've reviewed Marcus's academic file, Principal Morrison began. While his test scores are above average, his behavior makes it impossible to keep him in a traditional classroom setting. He's not violent, Marcus's mother said. Her English carried a slight accent. She'd immigrated from the Philippines 15 years ago. He's not disruptive with bad intention. He just learns different. Different isn't sufficient, Dr. Richard Boyle, the district superintendent, said. He was a large man with an expensive suit and the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. We have standards, protocols. Marcus refuses to follow them. Because your protocols don't work for him. Elena's voice rose. You're punishing my son for learning differently than you teach. Mrs. Webb, Principal Morrison said gently, we're not punishing Marcus. We're acknowledging that our school isn't equipped to handle his unique needs. What you're saying is unteachable. The word landed like a bomb. We're saying traditional methods don't reach him, Dr. Boyle clarified. There are alternative schools, programs for students with behavioral challenges. He doesn't have behavioral challenges. Elena was standing now. He has a brain that works differently. And instead of trying to understand how he learns, you're giving up on him. Mrs. Webb, please sit down. Principal Morrison's voice was firm. We've tried for 3 years. Multiple teachers, multiple interventions, multiple accommodations. Nothing works because Marcus won't meet us halfway. I tried. Marcus's voice cracked. I tried so hard to do it your way. But when I can't, when I need to do it differently, you call it wrong. You call it disruptive. You call me unteachable. The panel exchanged glances. Marcus, Dr. Boyle said, do you understand what unteachable means? It means you've decided I'm broken. It means our methods can't reach you. That's different. No, Marcus said, and his voice was steady now, filled with a clarity born from months of feeling invisible. It means you've decided your methods are more important than whether I actually learn. You'd rather expel me than question whether your teaching might be the problem. The room went silent. This hearing is concluded, Principal Morrison said. Marcus Webb is expelled from Lincoln Academy effective immediately. We'll provide information about alternative educational programs. Elena Webb grabbed her son's hand and walked out of the conference room with her head high. In the parking lot, she finally broke down. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Mom. I should have fought harder. Should have. Mom. Marcus looked at her, 14 years old and suddenly feeling ancient. They were never going to see me differently, so I'll have to prove I can learn without them. How? I don't know yet, but I will. The alternative education program was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a check cashing place. Marcus attended for 6 weeks before realizing it was essentially a holding pen for students the system had given up on. The teachers were barely qualified. The curriculum was worksheets designed for elementary students. The expectation was that everyone would drop out by 16 and get their GED eventually. Marcus stopped going. His mother was working 70 hours a week and didn't have the energy to fight him on it. As long as he stayed out of trouble, she was too exhausted to care where he was during the day. So Marcus taught himself. He spent his days at the public library, where the librarian, Mrs. Chen, no relation to his former science teacher, took pity on him and didn't ask why he wasn't in school. What are you reading today? She'd ask. Physics, Marcus would say, or ancient history, or computer programming. He devoured books, not because anyone assigned them, but because learning, real learning, deep learning, the kind where you follow your curiosity down rabbit holes and emerge with understanding, was the only thing that made him feel alive. But he noticed something as he taught himself. He learned differently than books were written. Traditional textbooks presented information linearly. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. They assumed you'd absorb information in the order it was presented. But Marcus's brain didn't work that way. He'd start with a question, how does gravity work? And then jump between physics, mathematics, astronomy, history, and philosophy to build understanding. He'd draw diagrams, pace while thinking, explain concepts out loud to empty rooms. He needed movement, visualization, and multiple perspectives before things clicked. And when they clicked completely. He didn't just memorize, he understood at a deep, foundational level. What if, Marcus thought one day in the library, this is how lots of people learn. What if the problem isn't that some students are unteachable, but that traditional teaching only works for one type of brain? He started taking notes, not on the subjects he was learning, but on how he was learning them. What helped? Movement, drawing, talking out loud, starting with questions instead of answers, connecting ideas across subjects instead of treating them as separate silos. What didn't help? Sitting still, listening to lectures, memorizing without understanding, following linear progressions that didn't match how his curiosity worked. By the time Marcus was 16, he had notebooks full of observations about his own learning process. He had no idea what to do with them. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus was at the library when a college student, drowning in her psychology textbook, asked him to watch her stuff while she used the bathroom. When she came back, Marcus had reorganized her notes. "What did you do?" she asked, looking at her notebook. "Sorry, I shouldn't have touched your stuff." I just noticed you were highlighting everything, which means you're highlighting nothing. So I reorganized your notes by concept instead of chapter and created visual connections between ideas. Does that make sense? She stared at her notes, then at him. This makes more sense than anything my professor explained. How did you do this? Marcus shrugged. That's just how my brain organizes information. Can you tutor me? I'm 16 and don't have a high school diploma. I don't care. You just taught me more in 5 minutes in a semester of lectures. Please. Marcus hesitated. Okay. Within 6 months, Marcus was tutoring 12 college students. He didn't advertise. Word just spread. There's this kid at the library who can explain anything in a way that actually makes sense. He charged $20 an hour, money he desperately needed to help his mom. But more importantly, he was learning how to teach. He discovered that most of his students had the same problem he'd had. Traditional teaching methods didn't match how their brains process information. So Marcus developed techniques. Concept mapping. Instead of linear notes, create visual web showing how ideas connect. Movement integration. Study while walking. Use gestures to represent concepts. Stand during difficult problems. Question first learning. Start with why does this matter before diving into what is this. Multisensory input. Combine reading, writing, speaking, and physical demonstration. Personal relevance. Connect every concept to something in the student's actual life. His students' grades improved dramatically. A college sophomore who'd been failing statistics started getting A's. A graduate student who'd failed her comprehensive exams 3 times passed on her 4th try after 2 weeks with Marcus. A pre-med student who was about to drop out ended up graduating with honors. How are you doing this? One student asked. My professors have PhDs. You don't even have a high school diploma. But you're a better teacher than any of them. I'm not teaching you content, Marcus said. I'm teaching you how to learn. Once you know how your brain works, you can teach yourself anything. That sentence would become the foundation of everything that followed. Marcus was 19 when Dr. Rachel Kim found him. Dr. Kim was an education researcher at the State University, studying why traditional teaching methods failed so many students. Someone had told her about the teenage library tutor who was getting remarkable results. She showed up one Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was helping a student with organic chemistry, using a set of hand-drawn molecular models and a lot of pacing. After the session, she introduced herself. I'm Dr. Kim. I study pedagogy, teaching methods. Can I ask you some questions about your approach? Marcus shrugged. Sure. They talked for 2 hours. Dr. Kim took notes frantically as Marcus explained his techniques, his observations, his theory that unteachable students weren't broken. They just needed different approaches. Have you documented this? She asked. In notebooks. Why? Because what you're describing aligns with 20 years of cognitive science research that most K-12 educators completely ignore. You've independently developed techniques that we know work, but schools refuse to implement. Why? Because changing how we teach is hard. It's easier to label struggling students as unteachable than to acknowledge that our teaching methods are outdated. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Validation. Finally, validation. What if, Dr. Kim said slowly, we formalize your approach, turned it into a real methodology, tested it empirically? I'm a college dropout. I was expelled at 14. Who's going to listen to me? You'd be surprised. The education world is desperate for solutions, and you have something most researchers don't. You've lived it. You were the student the system failed. That gives you credibility. For the next 3 years, Marcus worked with Dr. Kim's research team. They formalized what Marcus had been doing instinctively. The Webb learning method consisted of 5 core principles. 1. Assessment before instruction. Don't assume how a student learns. Ask them, test them, observe them. 2. Multimodal delivery. Teach every concept through at least 3 different modalities: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, written. 3. Movement integration. Allow and encourage physical movement during learning, pacing, gestures, standing, manipulating objects. 4. Conceptual webbing. Show connections between ideas across subjects instead of teaching in isolated silos. 5. Student agency lets students choose how to demonstrate understanding. Tests, projects, presentations, or teaching others. They tested it in small groups, then larger ones, then in actual classrooms with teachers trained in the Webb method. The results were staggering. Students labeled as learning disabled showed 40% improvement in comprehension. Students with ADHD who'd been failing started passing when allowed to move while learning. Students who'd been told they were bad at math discovered they weren't. They'd just never been taught in a way that matched their thinking. At 22, Marcus co-authored his first academic paper, Beyond Unteachable, How Learning Method Diversity Improves Outcomes for All Students. It was published in the Journal of Educational Psychology. At 24, he gave his first conference presentation. At 26, he founded the Webb Learning Institute, training teachers in his methodology. At 28, he completed his PhD in education, not through traditional coursework, but through a portfolio-based program that recognizes research and practical experience. Dr. Marcus Webb, the unteachable student, was now Dr. Webb, teaching others how to teach. The Webb method spread faster than Marcus expected. Teachers were desperate for approaches that actually worked. Students who'd been labeled as problems suddenly thrived when taught differently. Schools started implementing the method. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Districts that adopted the Webb method saw 35% reduction in special education referrals, 50% improvement in engagement scores, 28% increase in standardized test scores, 70% reduction in disciplinary referrals for disruptive students, because it turned out that many disruptive students were just students whose learning needs weren't being met. Marcus trained teachers across the country. He wrote books. He gave keynotes. And every time, he started the same way. I was expelled at 14 for being unteachable. The school system decided I was a problem. But I wasn't the problem. The teaching was a problem. The response was always the same: thunderous applause from teachers who'd seen it work, and uncomfortable silence from administrators who'd spent careers defending traditional methods. By year 10, the Webb method was being used in 3,000 schools across 37 countries. The research base was extensive. Peer-reviewed studies confirmed what Marcus had discovered through trial and error. Diverse learning approaches produce better outcomes for all students, not just struggling ones. Even high-achieving students performed better when given choices in how they learned and demonstrated knowledge. The method wasn't just helping the students who'd been labeled unteachable. It was improving education for everyone. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. From Dr. Patricia Morrison, Lincoln Academy subject, National Education Summit, keynote invitation. Marcus stared at the name. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the principal who'd expelled him 15 years ago. He opened it. Dr. Webb, I'm writing on behalf of Lincoln Academy and the National Education Board. We're hosting our annual Education Summit, and we'd like to invite you to deliver the keynote address on the Webb learning method. We've been following your work with great interest. Several districts in our region have implemented your approach with remarkable results. We'd be honored to have you share your insight with our community. The summit will be held at Lincoln Academy on April 15th. I hope you'll consider this invitation. Sincerely, Dr. Patricia Morrison, Principal, Lincoln Academy. Marcus read it 3 times. Lincoln Academy, the school that expelled him, the place that decided he was unteachable. They wanted him to teach them. The irony was almost too perfect. Marcus called Dr. Kim. They invited me back, he said. Lincoln Academy. Yeah, to give the keynote at their education summit. Are you going to do it? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Part of me wants to say no, wants to tell them to figure it out themselves the way I had to. And the other part remembers being 14 and desperate for just one person to understand how I learned. The other part wants to make sure no kid goes through what I went through. So what are you going to do? I'm going to say yes, but on my terms. Marcus replied, Dr. Morrison, I'll accept your invitation on one condition. I want to meet with the current students who've been labeled as behavioral problems or learning disabled before the keynote. I want to talk to the students you're about to give up on. If you agree, I'll be there. Dr. Marcus Webb. Her response came within an hour. Agreed. Thank you, Dr. Webb. Marcus arrived at Lincoln Academy 3 days before the summit. The building looked exactly the same. Same brick exterior. Same trophy cases in the hallway. Same smell of floor wax and cafeteria food. But Marcus was different. He wasn't the desperate 14-year-old being expelled. He was Dr. Webb, returning to the place that had broken him, armed with proof that they'd been wrong. Principal Morrison met him in the lobby. She was older now, gray hair, lines around her eyes, but still commanding, still certain. Dr. Webb. She extended her hand. Thank you for coming. Dr. Morrison. Marcus shook it. Thank you for the invitation. They stood there for a moment, two people carrying the weight of 15 years between them. I've arranged meetings with 7 students, she said. They are all struggling. Multiple teachers have recommended alternative placements. You mean they've recommended expulsion? Her expression flickered. We prefer the term alternative educational setting. I was given an alternative educational setting. It was a strip-mall dropout factory where they expected me to fail. The programs have improved since then. Dr. Morrison. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Can I see the students now? The 7 students sat in a conference room, looking suspicious and defensive. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself. I'm Dr. Webb, he said, sitting down with them instead of standing in front of them. 15 years ago, I was expelled from this school for being unteachable. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how you learn. That got their attention. For the next 2 hours, Marcus talked with each student individually. Jamal, who couldn't sit still during lectures but could explain complex ideas while shooting baskets in the gym. Sophia, who failed every written test but could teach concept to other students with perfect clarity. Deshaun, who was labeled as oppositional but was actually asking why questions that teachers couldn't or wouldn't answer. Emma, who doodled through every class but whose doodles were actually sophisticated visual note-taking systems. Chen, who was silent in class discussions but wrote brilliant essays when given topics he cared about. Maria, who needed to pace while thinking and was constantly sent to the hallway for disruption. Tyler, who had been recommended for special education but just needed information presented visually instead of verbally. Every single one of them reminded Marcus of himself. Here's what I want you to understand. Marcus said when they were all together again. You're not broken. You're not unteachable. You learn differently than how this school teaches. And that's not your failure. It's theirs. They're going to kick us out, Jamal said, just like they kicked you out. Maybe, but I'm going to try to change that. How? By teaching them how you learn. By proving that different isn't effective. What if they don't listen? Sophia asked. Then you do what I did. You prove them wrong anyway. You find your own path. You become so successful that they have to acknowledge they were wrong about you. Marcus paused. But I really hope it doesn't come to that. Because you shouldn't have to wait 15 years for validation. You deserve teachers who understand you now. But standing there, about to walk onto the stage in the building that had expelled him, Marcus realized that wasn't the speech he wanted to give. He threw out his notes. The applause as he walked on stage was enthusiastic but polite. Marcus stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of educators. Front row, center, Dr. Patricia Morrison. Next to her, members of the administrative team who'd been there 15 years ago. Marcus took a breath. 15 years ago, he began, I stood in a conference room in this building while a panel of administrators decided I was unteachable. The auditorium held 2,000 educators, teachers, principals, administrators, district officials, all there to learn about the Webb method. Marcus stood backstage, looking at his notes one last time. He prepared a standard presentation, research data, implementation strategies, success metrics. The auditorium went silent. I was 14 years old. I loved learning. I read constantly, asked endless questions, wanted to understand everything. But I couldn't sit still. I needed to move while I thought. I drew instead of taking linear notes. I made connections between subjects that my teachers said were off topic. He paused. So my teachers labeled me as disruptive, as oppositional, as someone who refused to follow instructions. And eventually, this school expelled me. You could hear a pin drop. The word they used was unteachable. Not, we don't know how to teach you. Not, our methods aren't working for you. Unteachable, as in, the problem was me. I was broken, defective, unable to learn. Marcus looked directly at Dr. Morrison. I believed you. 4 years. I believed I was a problem. It took me a long time to understand the truth. I wasn't unteachable. You were unteaching. Gasps rippled through the audience. You taught in only one way and expected all students to adapt. When we couldn't, when our brains worked differently, you labeled us as broken instead of questioning whether your methods were limited. He clicked to his first slide. The 7 students he'd met with. 3 days ago, I met with 7 students from this school. All of them are currently labeled as behavioral problems. All of them have been recommended for alternative placements. All of them remind me of myself at 14. He clicked through slides showing samples of their work, Jamal's kinesthetic explanations, Emma's visual notes, Chen's essays. Every single one of these students is brilliant. They are not unteachable. They are being unteached by a system that values compliance over understanding, uniformity over diversity, sitting still over actual learning. The audience was riveted. The Webb method that you invited me here to discuss isn't revolutionary. It's not complicated. It's just teaching that acknowledges students have different brains. He clicked to his core principles. Assess how each student actually learns. Deliver content through multiple modalities. Allow movement. Show connections between ideas. Let students demonstrate understanding in ways that match their strengths. Marcus's voice grew stronger. These aren't accommodations for special needs students. This is just good teaching. And the research proves it works better for all students, not just the ones you've labeled as problems. He clicked to outcome data. The numbers were undeniable. Schools using the Webb method see dramatic improvements across the board. Better test scores, better engagement, better behavior, better outcomes. Because when you teach students the way they actually learn, they succeed. He paused, letting the data sink in. But here's what really matters. Students who would have been expelled, students like me, stay in school. Graduate, go to college. Become doctors, engineers, teachers, researchers. Marcus clicked to the final slide. A photo of himself at 14, looking lost and broken, next to a recent photo of him receiving his PhD. This is what happens when you label a student as unteachable and give up on them. You miss out on 15 years of potential. You force them to prove you wrong on their own. You make their success happen despite you, not because of you. The auditorium was completely silent. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to challenge you. Every student you labeled as unteachable, as a behavior problem, as learning disabled. I want you to ask yourself, have I actually tried to understand how this student learns? Or have I just tried to make them learn the way I teach? He looked at Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison, you told me I didn't belong in traditional education. You were right. Traditional education didn't work for me. But that wasn't because I was broken. It was because traditional education was too rigid to adapt to how my brain worked. He addressed the full audience again. You invited me here to teach you the Webb method. But the method isn't the point. The point is this. Students aren't unteachable. We're just lazy when we decide it's easier to label them than to change how we teach. Marcus stepped back from the podium. I was unteachable according to this school. Now schools around the world use my method. That's not because I magically became teachable. It's because I found teachers who were willing to learn how I learned. He smiled sadly. Imagine what would have happened if someone at this school had done that 15 years ago. Imagine the time I would have saved, the pain I would have been spared, the years I wouldn't have spent believing I was broken. His voice broke slightly. I don't want any student to go through what I went through. I don't want any 14-year-old to believe they're unteachable. Because they're not. They never are. He clicked to a final slide. Just text. There are no unteachable students. Only unteaching teachers. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. The applause started slowly. Then built. Then became a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at Dr. Morrison, who had tears streaming down her face. After the keynote, Dr. Morrison approached Marcus backstage. "Dr. Webb, could we speak privately?" They went to her office, the same office where she told him he didn't belong in traditional education. She closed the door and turned to face him. "I was wrong," she said simply. 15 years ago, I was wrong about you." Marcus waited. "I watched your presentation, and all I could think was, that boy was brilliant and we broke him. We had a student who thought differently, learned differently, saw the world differently, and instead of nurturing that, we punished him for it." She sat down heavily. "I've been in education for 35 years. I became a principal because I wanted to help students. And today I realize that I've spent my career hurting the students who needed help most." "Dr. Morrison, please, let me finish." Her voice shook. "Those 7 students you met with, I was prepared to recommend alternative placements for all of them, just like I did with you, because it was easier than questioning whether our teaching methods were the problem." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. I failed you, and I failed countless other students just like you." Marcus sat down across from her. "I didn't come here for an apology," he said gently. "I came here to change things, to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." "How can I help?" "Implement the Webb method. Really implement it, not just as a program for problem students, but as a default way of teaching. Train your teachers. Give them resources. And most importantly, change the culture from students must adapt to our teaching to our teaching must adapt to students." "I will. I promise." "And those 7 students I met with, they stay. We'll work with them, learn from them, teach them the way they need to be taught." Marcus nodded. "That's all I wanted." 6 months later, Jamal designed a kinesthetic learning lab where students could move while learning. Sophia created a peer teaching program that recognized verbal explanation as valid assessment. Emma developed a visual note-taking guide that was adopted district-wide. Lincoln Academy became a pilot site for comprehensive Webb method implementation. Every teacher received training. Every classroom was redesigned to allow for movement and multiple learning modalities. Every student was assessed not just for what they knew, but for how they learned. The 7 students Marcus had met became ambassadors, helping teachers understand what students needed. The results were remarkable. Within 1 semester, disciplinary referrals dropped 60%. Student engagement scores increased 45%. Test scores improved across all demographics. Teacher satisfaction increased because classroom management became easier when students' needs were met. Other schools noticed, started asking questions, wanted to visit and learn. The same district that had expelled Marcus for being unteachable became a model for how to teach all students effectively. 2 years after the keynote, Marcus returned to Lincoln Academy for their graduation ceremony. He'd been invited to give a commencement address. But more importantly, he was there to watch 7 specific students walk across that stage. Jamal, who'd been told he was too hyperactive to succeed, graduated with honors and a full scholarship to study physical therapy. Sophia, who'd failed every written test, graduated with a 3.8 GPA and plans to become a teacher. Emma, the doodler, had her visual notes published in an educational journal. Jen, Deshawn, Maria, Tyler, all of them graduated. All of them thriving. Students who would have been expelled 2 years ago were now walking across the stage to applause. After the ceremony, Dr. Morrison approached Marcus. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back, for not giving up on us even though we gave up on you." "I didn't do it for you," Marcus said honestly. "I did it for them." He gestured to the graduates. "For every student who deserves better than being labeled unteachable." "I know, but still, thank you." Marcus's mother, Elena, attended the graduation. She found him after the ceremony, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Anak," she said, using the Tagalog word for child. "You took the worst thing that happened to you and turned it into something that helps thousands of students." "I learned from you, Mom. You never gave up on me even when the school did. I knew you weren't broken. I always knew. I wish I'd known." They stood together, watching students celebrate, and Marcus thought about the 14-year-old boy who'd been expelled from this building believing he was too broken to learn. That boy would never have imagined this moment, would never have believed he'd return as Dr. Webb, teaching educators how to teach, would never have dreamed that the school that expelled him would become a model for inclusive education. But here he was, proof that Unteachable was a lie. 5 years after the keynote, the Webb learning method was now used in 12,000 schools across 63 countries. Marcus's organization trained 50,000 teachers annually. The research base was extensive and undeniable. Diverse teaching approaches produced better outcomes for everyone. Districts that fully implemented the method saw 70% reduction in special education referrals, 55% reduction in disciplinary actions, 40% improvement in standardized test scores, 85% increase in student engagement, 90% increase in teacher satisfaction. Because when teaching matched how students actually learned, everything got better. Marcus still gave keynotes regularly, and he always started the same way. I was expelled at 14 for being unteachable. Today, I want to talk about the lie hiding in that word. Then he'd tell his story, show the data, challenge educators to question their assumptions, and every time, without fail, teachers would approach him afterward with stories. I have a student just like you were. Your presentation made me realize I was giving up on them instead of changing my approach. I was about to recommend a student for expulsion. Instead, I tried the Webb method. They are thriving now. I was the unteachable student 30 years ago. Thank you for proving it wasn't my fault. Marcus kept a folder of letters from students who'd benefited from the method. One in particular he read whenever he doubted the work method. Dr. Webb, I'm a senior at Lincoln Academy. 2 years ago, I was about to be expelled. You came and talked to a group of us problem students. You told us we weren't broken, that we just learned differently. I didn't believe you at first. But then the school changed. Teachers started teaching in ways that actually made sense to me. They let me move. Let me show what I knew in different ways. Stop punishing me for thinking differently. I just got accepted to MIT. Me, the kid who was too disruptive to stay in school. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for proving we were never unteachable. Jamal, Marcus kept that letter on his desk. On hard days, when he was tired of fighting systems that resisted change, he'd read it and remember why the work mattered. Marcus stood in his office, looking at the wall covered with photos. Photos of students who'd been labeled unteachable and went on to succeed. Photos of schools transformed by implementing the method. Photos of teachers who'd learned to teach differently. And in the center, framed and prominent, his expulsion letter from Lincoln Academy. He kept it not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder how wrong people can be when they value compliance over understanding. His phone rang. A school district in Singapore wanted to implement the Webb method. Marcus smiled and answered. The work continued. The method spread. And somewhere, a student who'd been labeled unteachable would get a teacher who understood that the problem was never the student. It was the teaching. There are no unteachable students. Only teaching that hasn't adapted to how different brains work. If you've ever been told you can't learn, that you're too disruptive, too different, too difficult to teach, that was a lie. You weren't broken. The system was too rigid, and you have every right to prove them wrong. To every educator reading this, the students you're about to give up on might be the ones who change education forever.